would you make sure that it
it
doesn't
there's
survive?
things you do. Obviously, you're here for a certain procedure, and if your pregnancy were, let's say you went into labor, the membrane's ruptured, and you delivered before we got to the termination part of the procedure here, then we would do things, we would not help it.
So while Dr. Cesare Santangelo gets to keep his clinic and his reputation, the woman who did more than perhaps anyone to bring to light his most recent scandal of the 5 late-term fetuses that I started off the night talking about has now been sentenced this week to nearly 5 years in prison. Lauren Handy from Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising has already been behind bars for about 9 months, for which she got credit for at her sentencing. If we lived in a better world, this 30-year-old would be feted for helping to find those babies on the curb outside the surgery abortion clinic where they appear to be waiting for pickup for incineration. She saved those 5's remains, plus nearly 100 smaller babies of a much earlier gestational age also within those boxes, callously left on the roadside by the butcher who took their life. She did everything she could to get Congress and powerful activists to obtain autopsies for the remains and to launch an investigation. Horrified by what she saw firsthand, Lauren began staging even more rescues, as they're called, where she and her fellow pro-life teammates would schedule fake abortion appointments under a different name, only to show up and to tie themselves to the waiting room chairs to plead their case to the other women considering the deaths of their own children. Some with her even sang hymns and prayed for conversions. And for one such past rescue happening in October of 2020 at the surgery clinic itself in Washington, Lauren and a few of her fellow travelers were convicted of charges including conspiracy against rights and the Biden DOJ's old favorite, violation of the Freedom of Access to Clinics Act, or the FACE Act. Joining us now to discuss is Steve Crampton, Senior Counsel for the Thomas More Society. Steve, thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us, Kara. Really appreciate it.
So I'm sick to my stomach over the sentencing decision. I know you were there in the courtroom when it was handed down. Is there any chance for an appeal at this point, or what's the best path forward for Lauren?
Yes, we're preparing an appeal as we speak for Lauren and several of her co-defendants. We are hopeful. There are excellent legal and factual issues on appeal. But the tragedy, as you've said, Kara, is, look, Lauren's already been behind bars for 9 months. That's virtually longer than any other civil rights peaceful activist has served to this point in time in our nation's history. And yet she faces another 4 years. It is absolutely unbelievable, really, I think, unforgivable what the Department of Justice, so-called, and their FBI allies have done here.
And as you were talking about, even just the 9 months she's already served while the trial was ongoing, but 5 years, that comes off really harsh to me, and I think to many who are reading this. Did the judge sentence on the higher end of sentencing for these convictions?
Strangely enough, no. The guidelines here called for, and again, I think those were wrongfully arrived at, called for 63 to 78 months. And then the Department of Justice argued vigorously in court yesterday. They wanted the high end of that range. So I think the judge thinks she's doing us a favor by keeping it below the actual guidelines or request. Nonetheless, 57 months. Just imagine what that means in the average life of an American. What will the country even look like after that? It's unforgivable.
It really is, and it makes me so upset because we could talk about all the criminals who get let in and out of prison constantly. We can talk about all the rioters who can, burn down buildings. They can take over buildings. They can shine lasers into the eyes of officers, leaving them with lifelong visual disabilities. They can beat people. They can attack people, and on it goes. And nothing ever seems to happen to any of them. And in fact, since 2020, a lot of those BLM and Antifa rioters have actually been getting money from the cities that they burned down. It's like the city said, thank you for destroying our tax base and destroying our, our buildings and the rest. Here, please give us some more. We're even going to pay you now for it. And at the same time, Biden's DOJ is going after peaceful pro-life protesters. I know you deal with it all the time. This is your line of work, protecting these people. So when it comes to Lauren, as you were mentioning earlier, some of the factual evidence and the rest on her side, could you explain her case, or perhaps your case over the Thomas More Society, in favor of Lauren to our audience?